Welcome to this explainer. Imagine, if you will, a single, incredibly action-packed 24-hour period. Picture a Sabbath day where a figure arrives in a completely new town, drops teachings with just unprecedented authority, performs absolutely astonishing public exorcisms, heals the sick behind closed doors, and by sundown, he's drawing these massive, desperate crowds. Yet, right in the middle of all this explosive, highly visible success, he's aggressively attempting to keep his true identity an absolute secret. It's a massive paradox, and it sits right at the very heart of Luke chapter 4. So today, we're going to decode the geographical, sociological, and deep theological puzzle of this frankly remarkable day in Capernaum.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really make sense of this narrative, we've broken it down into 5 key parts: a new base of operations, authority over the demonic, healing the private sphere, the mystery of secrecy, and finally, expanding the mission. All right, starting us off with Section 1, a new base of operations, arriving in Capernaum. You know, to really grasp the significance of this specific Sabbath, we have to remember the context. Jesus literally just faced a super harsh rejection right in his own hometown of Nazareth. So Capernaum, it isn't just some random stopover for the weekend, it's the foundational staging ground for his entirely new mission. And right away, there is this immediate, palpable contrast in the synagogue that morning. Think about the standard teachers of the day. They would usually just express viewpoints or safely quote prior traditions, right? But Jesus is recognized for his definitive authority. He isn't just throwing out an opinion, he's bringing the absolute truth of God directly to the people. It's a huge, jarring shift for the folks sitting in that audience. Moving right along to Section 2, authority over the demonic, confronting supernatural forces. So, Jesus doesn't just talk the talk with this new authority, he immediately backs it up. He shifts right from a powerful word of instruction to a highly powerful word of exorcism. And honestly, look at what's happening here. Casting a demon out right in the middle of the synagogue is shocking. If you look back at the Old Testament, demons were mostly associated with out-of-the-way wildernesses and desolate, abandoned locations. Yet here we are, and the devil's forces are actively occupying the very heart of Israel's places of worship. Jesus facing down a demon in this sacred space directly mirrors his earlier intense confrontation out in the wilderness. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the profound literary parallel the source material is drawing for us. Think back to the Old Testament for a second. After David was anointed by God's Spirit, he ministered to King Saul, who, if you remember, was heavily troubled by a distressing spirit. Well, here we're seeing that play out on a massively grander scale. Christ, newly anointed by the Spirit, is stepping into a very similar role, but for the entirety of Israel. He actually has the ultimate authority and power to cleanse these sacred spaces. Next up, Section 3, healing the private sphere, inside Simon's house. So as the timeline rolls forward into the Sabbath afternoon, the scene shifts. We move away from the highly public, crowded arena of the synagogue and step into the private home of Simon, who we'll later know as Peter. Now, to fully grasp the vibe here, we've kind of got to unpack the complex societal structures of the first century. People didn't really live in isolated nuclear families. They lived in large, extended families and traveled in collective groups. When Jesus sets up Simon's house as his base of operations, he's stepping right into the middle of this dynamic network. And Simon's mother-in-law, she wasn't just some background extra. As the primary hostess of this new hub, she actually held a position of significant honor. Knowing that, you can see why it's such a big deal when she gets struck down with a severe fever. It basically derails the entire household. It's absolutely fascinating how Luke chooses to describe this, by the way. He writes about the fever almost as if it were a literal form of demonic possession. He says it afflicts her. And Jesus doesn't just, treat the symptoms. He actively rebukes the fever, using the exact same language he used with the demon that morning. Boom, it leaves her instantly. And you'd think she'd want to take a nap and recover, right? But no, her immediate response is to rise up and serve him, stepping right back into her honorable role as hostess. He's totally restoring both public and private order here. Which brings us to Section 4, the mystery of secrecy, the climax of the narrative. All right, so the afternoon fades into evening, the sun goes down, which officially marks the end of the Sabbath restrictions. Suddenly, that quiet, private healing isn't so private anymore. Massive crowds literally gather at the front door, bringing everyone who's sick in the whole town. And this right here builds to our central mystery. As Jesus is healing all these people, the demons are coming out and they're shouting his true identity. They're calling him the Son of God. But Jesus actively forbids them to speak. So here's the multi-million-dollar question. As his fame is absolutely skyrocketing, why in the world is he suppressing the knowledge of who he really is? Why this intense, almost aggressive demand for secrecy when his actions are so incredibly public?
So the crucial point is this narrative logic of secrecy. And honestly, it goes way beyond just trying to lay low. Ironically, the demons possess a deep knowledge about Jesus' mission that the crowds just don't have yet. Think about it. If there is a premature revelation of his identity as the Messiah before his death and resurrection have even happened, it opens the door to massive misunderstanding. The crowds, seeing all this raw power, would undoubtedly try to make him a political earthly king. And that outcome, that would completely undermine the true purpose of his mission. It would draw him entirely away from the path of the cross.
Finally, we land on section 5, expanding the mission, leaving Capernaum. This brings us to the conclusion of the narrative arc for this whole chapter, and honestly, it ends with another huge, surprising twist. Despite the immense fame, the wildly adoring crowds, and the undeniable sweeping success he built up in just one single day in Capernaum, Jesus leaves. And he doesn't just leave, he leaves secretly. He slips away to a desolate place all by himself. When the desperate crowds finally track him down and try to keep him there, he insists he has to continue his broader preaching mission, eventually heading all the way down to the synagogues of Judea. He literally refuses to be boxed in or contained by earthly success.
So what does this all mean? Well, it leaves us with one final, absolutely vital piece of the puzzle. Everything we've explored today, the authority, the dramatic exorcisms, the private healings, the intense secrecy, and then that sudden secret departure, it is all driven by a very specific underlying purpose. To truly decode this, I'm going to challenge you to go back to the primary source itself. Grab a Bible and read Luke chapter 4, verses 18 to 19. What foundational mission statement does Jesus make right there? And how does it perfectly explain every single action he took on this astonishing day in Capernaum? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep examining the text for yourself, and I'll see you next time.